So some of you have asked me why it took me 2 years to take up the family business. Dad had been a member of Camber & Sons logging outfit since I was born, and it should have been easy to get a job with them. Dad would have likely been overjoyed to have me come to work with him, but I had other ideas. I, like many others before me, had tried to escape Rayford as soon as I was able. After 3 years of ROTC and nearly constant pushing to get the credits I needed, I was eligible for early graduation. I would turn 18 in May, a few weeks after school ended for the year, and I took the opportunity to move on to the next stage of my life. With my grades, my ASVAB score, and participation in ROTC, I was also offered an invitation to join the Army, and I left on a 2-year tour of duty after basic. This was during a time when the armed forces were still heavily entrenched in the Middle East, and I took up my rifle and had soon forgotten about Forresters and Rayford and the concerns of my childhood. I was going out with my unit every day, patrolling and securing sites, but it appeared that my childhood hadn't quite forgotten about me. About a week after I turned 20, the dreams started. I was back in Rayford, standing amidst the fog. I was 10 years old, sitting on the pavement and shuddering in fear. This time, there wasn't just one Forrester, though. There were hundreds. They came shambling out of the fog, scraping the pavement and groaning as their bodies twisted and writhed. They surrounded me, ringing me in as they pushed closer and closer. One of them shambled his way to the front, his form obscured by the fog, but I felt like I knew who it was. There was only one person it could be for me, and as they leered at me from the depths of the miasma, I would come awake fitfully, sometimes waking up my fellow bunkmates. It would take a week of inadequate sleep before the strain finally got to me, and it ended up saving my life. I was driving through the pitted streets of Fallujah, my unit heading to investigate a couple of suspected gathering places for rebel rousers, when someone ran across the road. What I saw was a gangling kid in blue shorts with a backwards cap, a kid who looked a lot like my brother had before being drug off, and when I turned the wheel to avoid him, everything went white before going black for a little while. We had hit an incendiary device buried by insurgents, but we hadn't hit it square. We had clipped it in our haste, and it had flipped the Humvee we'd been riding in. We'd been rolled into a nearby ditch. Briggs, the medic on board, had called for support, and only me and a couple of others had been injured at all. I'd taken a hit to the head when it slammed into the side of a door, and the docs thought I might have brain damage. That and the explosion left me in the hospital for a few weeks, and when someone from HR came to speak with me, I knew it wasn't good. The medics say you have something going on after the crash. It isn't life-threatening, but they don't know how a combat situation would affect it. Your quick thinking might have possibly saved the lives of your squad, and the brass is willing to reward that. They want to offer you a medical discharge with full compensation. This'll get you your service benefits and the same care as a 4-year enlistee. They also want to offer you a Medal of Valor for what you did out there. I don't know how you feel about your service career, but I think you'd be a fool not to accept it. So they offered me a Medal of Valor for nearly falling asleep at the wheel and swerving to avoid a hallucination. My squad thought I had seen nothing in the road, but they all thought it had been a lump or a divot that didn't look right. None of them had seen anyone dart out across the street, and when I suggested it, they told me to stop being modest. The other 2 injured soldiers were discharged pretty quick, and I packed my stuff and prepared to go home. After the dreams and seeing my older brother in a foreign land, I was pretty sure I could take these things as a sign that something wanted me back in Rayford. Given my dreams, I wasn't sure it was an invitation I wanted to accept. But I returned to Rayford anyway, and the town rolled out the red carpet for me. Rayford is a town of about 55,000, and they don't have a lot of heroes. Well, other than the brave loggers who head into the forest every day, knowing what lives there. It was weird to come back to a place I had thought I'd left behind, especially as a hero of sorts. I had looked at the statue of the 2 guys who died in Korea about 100 times as a kid. It was weird to think that I might be on their level. Rayford had mostly been immune to wars ever since the Civil War, and the few who had been enlisted hadn't really made much of an impression. Then the Talbert twins had enlisted to go to Korea. They had died heroically, holding a hill in an unpronounceable Providence for 6 days. They nearly lasted till reinforcements arrived, but the chopper found them both dead in the gun nest they occupied. The town had memorialized them in granite, and it was strange to be counted amongst them. I spent my first week walking around like a celebrity. My old high school friends who still lived in town invited me to parties. People paid for my meals at restaurants. I was treated better than I had been in years, but just because I was home didn't mean that the dreams stopped. If anything, they only got worse. I was no longer sitting on the hot top and waiting for the Forresters. No, I was hoofing it through a war zone. My gun was heavy. My undershirt stuck to me from beneath my flak jacket. But the enemies that reared up were the creaking shades of the Forresters. The wooded bits of them seemed to writhe behind the standing smog that permeated everything. No matter how many times I shot them, they always seemed to pop back up. I would always wake up just as a familiar shape rose up behind the smog, the barrel shaking as I came awake. I didn't know what to make of them until Friday night found me at a party. My friend Frank was throwing a house party, and he couldn't think of anyone better to have there but a genuine war hero. "You'll be there, right?" he said, and it was pretty clear that he had told people I would be. Friday night saw me sitting in his parents' kitchen, drinking a lukewarm beer and talking with people that I hadn't seen in 3 years. Most of them had either never left or had never been farther from the city limits than a few hours. I was honestly finding it hard to relate to them. The more people I talked to, the more I questioned why I was still here at all. Was this my life now? Living with my parents and working some dead-end job in a town that was shrinking yearly as the forest threatened to reclaim it? I smiled at my old friends and laughed at their stories or commiserated with their losses, but I was honestly debating taking my house budget and going anywhere but Rayford. Then, someone put a hand on my shoulder, and I looked up to see the last person I had expected. "Haven't seen you in a while, Rambo. Glad you made it back alive." It was Tyler, and his smile looked as hollow as my own. We sat around and talked a lot that night as bottles piled up, and we both shared a little more than we meant to. Tyler had been struggling since high school. His dad's grocery store was doing well, but Tyler wasn't ready to take it from him. The decision, however, seemed to be out of his hands. The doctors had told his dad he had cancer a few months ago, the kind that creeps in fast and doesn't leave a lot of time for goodbyes. His dad was stage 3 now, practically sprinting to the finish line, and Dr. John had given him weeks instead of months. The shit of it is that Dad never smoked, never did any of the things that usually lead to cancer. So when he started looking into how he had contracted such an aggressive type, they found it was the chemicals on the vegetables that he stocked from the local farms. They'd been spraying their produce with something to get rid of the wood beetles, and Dad had been coming into contact with it for years. The business literally killed him, and now he wants me to take it up. How do I tell my old man as he lays dying that I don't want to take up a mantle that put him in an early grave? I didn't have any answers for him, and we both just sat there in silence as people milled about us. Times like this make me think about Simon. I looked away, not sure when we were going to come to this topic of my brother. I still feel guilty about that day. I keep wondering what I could have done to nothing. I cut in. There's nothing you could have done. I've told you this for years. It was a fluke. There isn't anything anyone could have done. Suddenly it was all too much. The crowd, the music, the sea of familiar faces that suddenly swam together in a sea of booze. It was all too much. I had planned to crash at Frank's after the party, the rules of the town still applying to heroes, but I just couldn't. I got up, heading for the door, when Tyler called my name and told me the Forresters would get me if I went out. I've spent 3 years in an active war zone, Tyler. I think I can make it home in one piece in a town I grew up in. No one seemed to notice as I walked out the door, and it wasn't until I started walking through the night that I began to think better of it. The night was quiet, not a bat or a night bird making a single noise, and it felt a little claustrophobic. Even in the desert there had been noise, but this almost felt like a truly foreign place. The wind pushed at the trees. The sudden intrusion of the skeletal brush across the concrete as unwelcome as the silence. I was about halfway home when the overwhelming urge to empty my bladder hit, and I was forced to find a bush along the side of the road. I was beginning to sober up, starting to worry that maybe I'd been a little too brash, when I noticed the fog rolling in around my ankles. I tried to hurry, wanting to hurry up so as to keep moving, but I had drank about a 10-pack all by myself, and when I zipped up and turned around, I was back in the fog bank. The mist was thick as it swirled around me, leaving me alone in the haze. As I watched, something shadowy moved amidst the fog, and I tried my best to stand completely still. I wasn't 10 anymore, and I meant to fight if this thing wanted me. I wouldn't be the first adult to go missing thanks to the foresters. It wasn't the huge group I'd expected, though, but a single forester, like the dreams I'd been having recently. As it moved, I got none of the usual apprehension I'd had when I was young. The forester wasn't as old, wasn't as degraded as the others, and its gait was unmarred by haste or hunger or whatever it was that moved them. The soft clump of wood on the road, however, was enough to tell me that some parts of it were less than natural. I stayed completely still as it came closer and closer, the mist obscuring all but its dark outline. Would it lunge and take me in a tackle? Would it disappear at the last minute and leave me trembling in the mist that I had been in when I was younger? Was it distracting me so another one could creep up behind me and get me? I didn't dare take my eyes off to look. I just watched as it came within 5 easy feet of me, knowing who it was before it uttered a single word. "Old Grove," it creaked. Its voice was like pines bending in the wind. "Simon?" I half whispered, and the thing stiffened as if it had heard something from a life 1,000,000 years ago. "Old Grove. Seek the heart at the Old Grove." Then it disappeared into the mist, a phantom that moved amidst the vapor, and I was left standing there with my fly down, thinking about my next move. Dad was overjoyed when I asked if Camber & Son was hiring the next morning. "Would you really want to work in the forest with your old man?" he said hopefully. "You don't think the chainsaw and the fallen trees would mess with your, whatever it is you got going on?" "Nah, Dad, I don't think it will. Besides, I need some income if I'm gonna get my own place. Can't live in Mommy and Daddy's house forever." I hadn't told them about the housing bonus the Army sent me every month. The money was not my objective, nor the reason I wanted to go into the woods. Camber & Son cut the woods back from the town itself, but they also went the deepest, and sometimes went as far as the borders to the Old Grove, the spot where the foresters were said to make their home. Camber & Sons were my best chance of finding out what had taken Simon. They were my best chance of seeing my brother again, in whatever form he might have taken now. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our Spooky Ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Zeronin, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.